Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this, our final lecture now in our little series on the rise of Sinn Féin. And today I want to talk about the denouement of all this, which is the election victory in December 1918. And as we said last time, the impact of the conscription crisis really is crucial. Because, certainly some people have pointed to the fact, I think there's something in this, and this is often forgotten, that Sinn Féin is winning all these by-elections, but it also loses a number of by-elections, and it loses those in 1918. Now, I'll tell you exactly where those by-elections happen. One of these is in Waterford City. Now, this, rather sadly, is actually John Redmond's old seat down there in Waterford. And it's actually his son who stands. Again, you see the familial links here. But the son actually wears his British Army uniform, making a big kind of statement against Dáil Éireann wearing his volunteer uniform and so on. And he does win. There's a lot of sentiment, obviously, for the Redmonds. They also lose two by-elections in Ulster. Again, one of these in East Tyrone. You can see the County Tyrone up there, East Tyrone. And also in South Armagh, where the Home Rulers win. They manage to hang on. So, are the wheels coming off a little bit? Who knows? It's been a good while since the Easter Rising now. Is that beginning to dissipate now, that sense of fury? And I don't know, possibly. But as I say, the conscription crisis now just boosts this movement again now and pushes it on even further. And again, the British make another rather stupid decision. They go for, we talk about coercion. They also decide now they're going to bring out the stick. And in May 1918, what they do is they arrest now some prominent leaders of Sinn Féin. So they round them all up. Not Michael Collins, he's one who ends up surviving, but they arrest all the others. So De Valera's round up Griffith, and all of them now are just gathered together on the pretext that there is apparently evidence of a German plot. That they, like as with the Easter Rising, they're plotting again with the Germans now. Absolutely no evidence of this at all. This is a complete fabrication, this whole thing. But again, it wins a huge amount of sympathy. And once again, they're back in prison. And you can go back to the whole idea of, they need to be freed, these people, protests and raising money and demonstrations. Again, very stupid own goal from the British. But you can see, as I say, how it helps this movement kind of along. Now, in the midst of this whole crisis now, there's another by-election due. And I don't want to mention one more. I know we've had a lot of by-elections. This is just one more worth mentioning. And this is in East Cavan. And you'll see Cavan there along the Ulster border. Is actually part of Ulster, but along the Northern Irish border as it is. And in this is just worth mentioning. Actually, I'll show you here. You can see on the map here where East Cavan is. In that the Sinn Féin movement now decide to put Griffith himself forward as their candidate. So he's in prison again. You see, you're saying put him in to get him out. Another one of these. Now, and they've held back from putting Griffith up for a seat, of course, because Griffith is such a controversial character. Griffith, as I say, is he's largely really a moderate, as we've said, but the Home Rule Party absolutely hate Griffith because he'd spent, as we said, years and years haranguing them in his newspapers, and they really don't like him at all. And they see, he's a long-term political enemy, Griffith, pouring vitriol on the Home Rule Party long before the Easter Rising and so on. So the choice of Griffith by Sinn Féin really is a sign of their confidence now. If they can put forward him, a controversial character like him, he's very divisive. So it's a very symbolic kind of moment, this. And Griffith is put forward, and what happens? He wins easily, again. And this really shows you, if Arthur Griffith, who, I say, they pour everything in to try and stop Griffith. It's personal, this is not Griffith getting a seat. If even he can win with a landslide now, you really feel now this party is dead. This is a moribund party, the Home Rule Party now. It's basically finish. Now, the events of all this, 1918, had taken place under the cloud now of a potential general election. Now, again, no one knows exactly when the war's going to end. As I say, the Germans have this big offensive in the spring, and I thought, God, they've beaten the Russians, of course. The Russians have signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. All these German troops have come over now to the Western Front, and there is a feeling amongst military commanders that, God, this could drag on for another year, this war. Others feel maybe as late as 1920 this war could go on now. But as I said, they realised very quickly that the Germans themselves, the German war effect essentially hollow on the inside. That this was a last throw of the dice, that the blockade has done its work and German society is basically crumbling now to defeat. So when the war ends, it ends very, very quickly, and it's quite a surprise. Now, when it comes to elections, of course, the UK itself had not had an election since back in 1910, would you believe, way back before the Ulster Crisis. Had these two elections in 1910, and then there hadn't been another one because the war had happened, and the idea was to suspend the war now, suspend the election, till the war's over. And finally now the war's coming to an end. So immediately now we're going to have this general election in December 1918. And finally we'll get our test now of what has changed politically in Ireland. We've got these by-elections and all these hints and so on. But now we'll finally get a real mandate, as it were, for this new political movement. Now, the election of 1918, it's important to remember, is incredibly different from the election, the rules of the election, from the one in 1910. I'll give you some examples of this. So the Representation of the People's Act is introduced, which essentially over doubles the Irish electorate. So it rises from 700,000 now to almost 2 million. So there's a huge number of new people are voting. And a whole new generation of young men over the age of 21 now are going to be voting for the first time. And the belief is that, younger people will tend to vote more radical. That's what young people tend to do in elections. They vote more radical. And therefore they'll vote for Sinn Féin in large numbers. And indeed they do. More noteworthy, of course, is the fact that the Representation of the People's Act now gives women over the age of 30 the vote. And they're a completely unknown quantity. I mean, no one knows what the hell women are going to do. They've never voted before. Who are they going to vote for? So that's another, let's say, new factor in this election. There's also, we have the seats in the election redistributed in the meantime. So a huge step, as it were, into modern democracy. So less rural seats now, radical redrawing of the constituency boundaries, far more seats now in Dublin and Belfast and more urban areas and so on. Again, are city people more likely to vote for Sinn Féin? You imagine probably would, because if you remember the Home Rule Party, how has it flourished? It's flourished because it has this backbone of rather conservative farmers. So they're going to have less power. There's also the fact as well in this election, remember, that a generation of Home Rule Party supporters and voters has died out. It's 8 years, so people have died. The older people, they've died. Also, we could throw into the fact that emigration, except to Britain during the First World War, had been almost impossible now. And what had happened in Ireland, there'd been this tradition now in Ireland where, certainly after the famine, of course, that lots of young people will go to America and go to North America now. And that acts as a kind of safety valve, if you like. And, I see younger people tend to be more radical, and it means that tens of thousands of young people are now stuck in Ireland, as it were, when this election happens. And they're going to be voting as well, where they would have been abroad. So all these factors kind of come together now in this election. And Sinn Féin's tactics in terms of the message it gives out is a very simple one. And the message is just full of nationalist romantic rhetoric. There's a lot of talk about this. The path to national salvation is open to us, blah, 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 blah. The British are basically blamed for everything, and there's nothing really constructive in terms of their message. It's about the Easter Rising and British persecution and so on. There's nothing, as it were, practical. There's no, we're going to build this many houses, or we're going to change this or change that. All they promise to do is, one is to send delegates to the Paris Peace Conference, which everyone's kind of doing, to ask for self-determination, backing from Woodrow Wilson and so on. They call for abstention as well. So we're not going to go to Westminster, and we're going to set up a new assembly now in Dublin. So we're going to, if we have a mandate, that's what we're going to do. We're basically going to declare independence. But that's really as far as it goes. The Home Rule Party, its policies are really about saying we've had a long, long track record now. Look at the wonderful things we've achieved. in terms of, say, social welfare and land redistribution and so on, even though, as we said, they didn't really achieve them. They're actually British. The British did that. But that's how they paint it. This is so evolutionary now. We're nearly there. Home rule's nearly there now. So just give us one more chance now, and finally, when we sit down to hammer this whole thing out, the Home Rule Party will finally deliver on its great promise. And I say, so when the election happens, and here's another big factor, just to mention this factor while it occurs to me, which is the role of the Labour Party in this. And the Labour Party are potentially, in Ireland, a very powerful third force who could, again, potentially scupper this Sinn Féin vote. There's a lot of people, I say, on the left who, there's a lot of socialists under the umbrella of Sinn Féin, but if there's a Labour alternative, they'll vote Labour, they'll vote socialist, they'll vote for all these, I say, practical socialist policies. But what happens is Sinn Féin are able to persuade Thomas Johnson, now the leader of the Irish Labour Party, to basically abstain from the election, to stand aside now, to allow this to be a straight fight now between the Home Rulers and Sinn Féin. It's a fateful decision for the Labour Party, this. And we'll see later on, they give him a kind of promise that, once we come up with policies and so on, if we win this election, then, absolutely we'll there'll be lots of socialism in there, lots of left-wing policies and, better unemployment benefits and so on. Complete rubbish. They can, this poor guy, and this guy really does, make a very, very fateful decision now. And, the Labour Party itself will only really until recent decades has become a powerful force in Irish politics yet again. But again, we'll talk about this in the place of socialism in this whole thing. But it's now going to become a straight fight now. And I say in November they decide they're going to step aside now. So the election's just a straight fight. And I'll show you the result now just to show you how much of a massive sea change we have. So here is the last election we had, the one in December 1910, if you remember, that leads to that, which leads to essentially the third Home Rule Bill being introduced and Home Rulers holding the balance of power. Now look what's happened now in 1918. A huge electoral mandate, a landslide victory now for Sinn Féin. They won 73 seats of the over 105 or so Irish seats there are, 73 of them. The Home Rule Party manages to win 6 seats. And when you look at the share of the vote, the share of the popular vote, Sinn Féin win about 47% of the popular vote. The Home Rule Party, it still has its supporters, still gets about 22% or so. So it's okay. Now, you will hear people, of course, say to you, well, hang on, Sinn Féin only won 47% of the popular vote, therefore it's not a real mandate. However, that is a bit of a red herring, because what happens is so dominant now with the Sinn Féin party becoming that in the west of Ireland, in Munster, the Home Rule Party don't even bother contesting the election because they know they're going to lose. So there's no contest in lots and lots of Irish seats in the west of Ireland. If there had been a contest, you can absolutely guarantee that Sinn Féin would have had a huge majority share of the vote. So whatever way you want to paint this, it's clear that Sinn Féin now, have a mandate. They have legitimacy for whatever that might mean. There's a few clouds on the horizon, I suppose. One is, as you can see there, that they tend to fail in Ulster, which is kind of surprising. You'll see there's some of the IPP, the Irish Parliamentary Party, the Home Rule Party. They hang on in some of these seats in Ulster, and that's going to be interesting later on when we talk about Northern Ireland. We talk about partition and Northern nationalism and so on. They seem to have not been buying into this Sinn Féin project at all, and Sinn Féin will never really manage to win the support of the majority of Catholics, the Catholic minority within Ulster. Always an uphill struggle, and the Home Rule Party will carry on, existing right throughout this period, through all the violence and all the change and so on. Again, the Home Rule Party is going to hold on in the north. So that's one thing to mention. Just by the way, to point right at the bottom there, you can see that little yellow splodge. That, of course, is Waterford City. So as we said, that's the reason that sticks out there, a strange little island of Home Rule constituency. But that's As I say, that's John Redmond's old seat, which his son is now holding. So again, he wins again and holds on to this seat now in the general election. So as I say, there's no doubt about this, no matter how you paint it. You can see Unionists now very solidly winning in the northeast. The Sinn Féin, this Sinn Féin movement built on the legacy of the Rising and so on, with all its kind of peculiarities. Remember, it still has this kind of military wing in the shape of the volunteers that are still there. And they just want another rising. They're ready to launch another rising. And this politics is, it's all very good, this, but when's the fighting going to happen? When are we going to avenge Patrick Pearse and the rest of the gang? And again, we'll talk about that, as I say, next time when we talk about the War of Independence. Where's the position of the volunteers in this? Where, again, the question is the position of violence in this. Because one thing no one had voted for, and this had never been any part of the literature, was war. There's never any threat within Sinn Féin literature and their manifesto and all that about a renewed campaign of violence. No, many people have had the sacrifice, they've had the moment, the Easter Rising and all that stuff. But now we'll see that war is what they're going to get. So what we'll do next time, I say in our new section, which is on the Irish War of Independence, we'll talk about what Sinn Féin will do now with this mandate. Will they be able to deliver on the promised republic, on full independence? We'll see. Again, that's going to be a very, very rocky road going forward. But as I say, so we'll return to that next time, what Sinn Féin does with this mandate now. And I say all that flows from that, which, as I say, will be conflict and war and so on. Okay, everyone, so I'll see you all, my friends, next time in the next section. See you soon.